Hello, everybody. Okay, so given what we learned in this chapter, I have to say that the Wano opening for the anime is one of the most spoiler heavy things in the history of spoiler heavy things. They show so much, it's crazy. Like I said, it spoils the manga, you know? The only thing they left out was Roger laughing at the One Piece and then actually showing what the One Piece is. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll leave a link to the video where I talk about this at the end. But essentially, during the Wano opening, there's a sequence where we see all 9 scabbards one after the other, except for Denjiro. And instead of Denjiro, we see Kyoshiro. So that was the moment that got a lot of fans talking. Wait, does that mean that Denjiro is Kyoshiro then? And I'm kind of wondering if the people in charge of the anime did that on purpose, because I think it must have been intentional. Because it went on for way too long. They made no effort to change it, and then it was just so obvious for it to be an accident. I also kind of appreciate the fact that even though we've heard statements about Oda saying that if fans figure out plot twists or secrets in the story, he doesn't like that, so what he ends up doing is that he changes those plot twists. I'm really glad that he didn't do that in this case, because the problem with doing that is that you can write yourself into a corner. Because when you have a plot twist, I think ultimately you have to find a balance between it being surprising and it making sense. And when you can't have both, always have it make sense. So at least this plot twist, even though it was kind of spoiled, it makes sense and it's true with what we've seen in the story. Because otherwise, if it's just surprising and it doesn't make sense, you're compromising the integrity of your story. And this doesn't do that, so I'm glad that, this is what it is. The cover page shows Gotti, again, attacking the Marines with his machine gun arm, because you see Chiffon there in the distance inside of a cage. At least I think that's Chiffon. I kind of feel like this cover story has overstayed its welcome, so I really want to see where it leads, because like right now I'm losing interest because it's just been so drawn out. But I'm pretty sure that's how most cover stories are. Like, you can't really see the big picture until it's over, and then you're like, oh, okay, so this pays off, or will pay off in the main storyline, so that's cool. The chapter starts off with Roger's crew using the octopus balloon that the Straw Hats used to float down from Skypiea. So it's a nice callback to chapter 967, where the narrator says that it was thanks to Gonfall that Roger and his crew made it back safely to the sea. And then we see Oden inheriting his will to his children, because he's teaching them to value how vast the world is outside of Wano, which goes hand in hand with his goal of opening up the borders of Wano to the rest of the world. And we also see 2 panels where Oden is inheriting his swordsmanship skills and his pervertedness to Momonosuke. I like how Rayleigh and Shanks are both the voice of reason in those panels. And then we get a reminder of the relationship or the bond between the Kozuki clan and the minks of Zou, which we kind of already knew, but I kind of get the feeling that Oda decided to include that as a reminder to hype up the minks, just to get us mentally prepared for the invasion once we go back to the present. We cut away from that and then we hear so that's the song that Hiyori plays in the beginning of Wano. If you remember the beginning of the anime, you see her playing the shamisen. It's the same song. It's called Moon Princess, yet another reference to the moon. And one of the main reasons behind that sequence with Oden and Hiyori is to explain a plot point that was introduced back in chapter 932, where Orochi is hosting a party and Komurasaki starts playing her instrument, the shamisen, and she puts on a mask, and one of the people at the party says, every time she plays that song, she puts on the mask. I wonder why that is. And I said it back when I reviewed the chapter, but it was so obvious that she was putting on the mask because the song makes her cry. To me, that song is going to be the Japanese equivalent of Remember Me from Coco. We flash forward to the time where the scabbards are escaping the flower capital, the execution, and we see Kinemon using his fire cutting technique with his swords. And turns out, I think it's implied that Shinobu was able to get the swords for them, for the scabbards. And there's a very meaningful moment with Shinobu asking Kinemon if she could be considered a retainer for the Kozuki clan. And Kinemon says, yeah, sure, knock yourself out. In fact, Oden made it a point that it didn't matter where we came from and stuff. He took us under his wing. So it's this incorporation of Shinobu kinda into the lineup of the retainers, which I think it's important for two reasons. Number one, because it explains the scene. Before we got into the Oden flashback, there's a scene where we see the scabbards walking, and Shinobu is part of that lineup. But then also, I think that if the traitor happens to be one of the scabbards, I think this is foreshadowing that Shinobu will take that ninth spot, that ninth place. We already knew that Nekomamushi and Inuarashi were going to start arguing and were going to be left behind, but what I didn't expect was to hear Nekomamushi actually suspecting Inuarashi and saying, you might be the traitor that Kaido was talking about. I feel like that's a pretty low blow, especially considering that both of them were willing to die to protect Raizo from being found out. So the cat and the dog get caught by one of the numbers, and then Denjiro and Ashura actually stay behind to confront one of the numbers as well. And I kind of want to know why they're being silhouetted. Is it because there's something mysterious about their appearance and maybe there's a revelation that Oda doesn't want to show? Or is it just because of Oda's silhouette fetish? We see King outside the castle there in Kuri. And speaking of King, I'm actually really glad that Denjiro ended up being Kyoshiro, because when it comes to matchups, a lot of people were saying like, oh, Zoro should fight Kyoshiro. And so now it's pretty much confirmed that that matchup is not going to happen because Kyoshiro is Denjiro and Denjiro is an ally. So in other words, it's looking more and more likely that Zoro will fight King in this arc. And then we get this scene with Kaido confronting Momonosuke, which I didn't think we were going to get, but I'm glad that we did, because it explains what Momonosuke said back in Zou about Kaido telling him, your father is a foolish lord, or idiot lord, right? So that explains that loose end, actually ties it up neatly, and then Momonosuke goes on to declare that he will one day become Lord of Wano, and that he'll be in charge of the place one day. And I think that's interesting because it paints a picture of, in the future, instead of Kaido roaming the skies and just blowing stuff up, we'll see a giant pink Momonosuke dragon floating around Wano, just, kind of overseeing the country thrive again. I think it's interesting that Kaido doesn't kill Momonosuke in that scene. I mean, he leaves him to die, but he doesn't kill him. He could have crushed his throat, right? Instead, he asks his name, and which is interesting that he doesn't immediately kill him, because he is under the understanding that Momonosuke is the last of the Kozuki. He says, if I kill you, that will end the Kozuki clan. So he doesn't immediately end his life, which kind of goes along with his character, because we know that Kaido loves to test people. He also says, that dream that you have in your head, that is something that somebody else put in there. So it got me to think, wait, does Kaido have a problem with people inheriting the will of others? And if so, why? I want more Kaido backstory. So he flings Momonosuke away and then turns into a dragon. And then I'm pretty sure that this scene with Denjiro and Ashura Doji against Kaido happens around this time. We see Kawamatsu swimming away with Hiyori, and then later on he's really distraught because Hiyori has ran away. And just as a reminder, the reason for why Hiyori leaves Kawamatsu is because Kawamatsu was giving her all the food that he found to her. So she didn't want him to die. She didn't want him to starve himself because of her. And that's why she left. Because Kawamatsu would lie to her. He would say, I have a stomach ache, so I can't eat. So you go ahead and eat the food that I found. Or he would say, I'm not really hungry because I already ate. So she caught on, and that's why she left. Time jump happens, and then Toki rushes down to Bakura Town to make her prophecy, but not before we get a little flashback of her and Oden. It's a pretty romantic scene that kind of showcases how much Toki loved Oden in a very subtle way. That she would rather stay with him in the present, actually die with him in the present, rather than leap into the future herself in search of a better life, in search of a better future. Of course, she makes the proper preparations for that by splitting up her kids. That way you don't put all your eggs in one basket. So if Momonosuke fails, you still have a chance that Hiyori might succeed. Or if Hiyori fails, you still have Momonosuke there. So that was well thought out, but her love as a wife still holds true, because if you remember, when Oden and Toki meet, Toki was about to jump into the future again, and it is because she meets Oden that she decides to stay in the present and never time jump herself again. So it's very, very romantic stuff, very subtle, but I think it's very powerful. Now, speaking of not so subtle, the language that Toki uses
for her prophecy in this chapter is pretty much the same language that was used when we first read the prophecy, when we first heard about it. But I think the context is different because if you read it the way that she's saying it in this chapter, because of everything that we've seen Toki and Oden go through, it makes it much more obvious that this is a love letter, her last love letter to her husband. Now, if you look at the panel where Toki is riding to Bakura Town on the horse, you see that she already has 2 arrows sticking out of her. So she's already been shot. But then when she's making her prophecy, you can see one of Kaido's men in the crowd with a weapon, with a gun. So it's pretty obvious that he shoots her, and that's how she dies, which is interesting because I always assumed that she had burned, right? That she had died being burned by the fire. And so the fact that she dies in front of people after being shot goes along with what Momonosuke was saying, that like I think he heard that people had actually seen his mother die. So that pretty much confirms that Toki is in fact dead, just like Oden. So those theories about Toki possibly being alive after all this, I think this chapter pretty much debunks. We shift over to Orochi, who can't stop shaking even though he's in hot water. Because according to Kyoshiro, if you remember, Kyoshiro said that Orochi really bought into Toki's prophecy and that scared him. I like how in the official translation, the sound effect for Orochi trembling is rattle rattle. So he's rattling, which is kind of funny because it makes him look more like a snake. Then we get into what happened to Denjiro, and I have to admit that it took me a while to understand what had gone down at the Enma Shrine. By the way, the Enma Shrine is the place where we have seen Zoro and Hiyori hanging out alone. No, but the reason why I think that's cool is because Hiyori knew about the shrine, which means that Kyoshiro must have shown her the place or must have allowed her to use the place as a hideout, and then she told Zoro about it. But anyway, I thought it was just so bizarre because he goes into the shrine and we see that, he's bleeding and he's crying. He's super upset, right? And then he starts roaring, starts crying out. And then we see time pass and it's snowing. The shrine is covered in snow. And then we see this ghost, this ghoul come out of the door. And for a moment, I actually thought that what had happened is that Denjiro had taken his own life and that he was dead there and that a ghost came out of the shrine to possess his dead body. That panel of both of them there was just very confusing at first. So it took me a while to process the fact that Denjiro had walked into the shrine. He spent a lot of time inside, and then when he came out, he had already been possessed by, according to the official translation, by the demon of anger, right? So he was so upset. Maybe he had like some survival's guilt, or maybe he just felt like he didn't do enough to save Oden's life or something. But yeah, that anger, that resentment filled him up and disfigured his face, just transformed him.
I really like how each of the identities of the 3 scabbards that we were missing in the beginning of the arc has a reference to something about Japanese folklore. Shutenmaru, for example, is a reference to Atamayama, which is a story about a man who eats a seed of a cherry tree and then begins to grow that tree on his head. Kawamatsu references the myth of the legendary kappa creature in Japan. And then Denjiro is a reference to the yokai, which are essentially Japanese spiritual beings, aka ghosts, that haunt things or people. So it is in fact now officially confirmed that Hiyori is Komurasaki, even though technically it was confirmed a while back, but we never actually had it mentioned in the actual manga chapter. So now it's pretty much a given, although it's kind of interesting because at first, like, she was introduced as this very conniving and cruel woman, because you remember, like, she would scam men out of their money, and she would use them to get money. But now I think, especially if you watch the anime does a much better job at showing that the people that she scammed were just really, really shady and garbage people to begin with. It's especially like old rich guys that she scams, and she does this now. It makes perfect sense why she does it. I don't even think it was her plan to scam them. I think it was Denjiro's plan, because he was in charge of all the money stuff. And in fact, in Denjiro's introduction, we actually see him kind of scam a shop owner, right? So I think it was his idea, and like she was the one who was executing the plans. But ultimately, the people that she scammed, I'm not saying that it was right that she did that, but at the same time, it's like you look at those men, and it's like they say that they loved her, but it's like no, you just had lust for her. It's obviously she was using your lust against you. In fact, the main old guy that she scams, we see this in the anime. He actually is really relentless and pretty ruthless when it comes to collecting debt, and so like he charges people enormous amounts of money so that he can give that money to Komurasaki so that he can pay off the contract because he's under the impression that if he collects enough money, he can buy Komurasaki from Orochi and then they can run away together, which was obviously false from the start. But the thing about this guy is that he actually sells out his family. He leaves everything. I mean, he sells everything just because of his lust for Komurasaki. And of course, it ends up like being a false promise. And I'm not saying that Komurasaki is right or that Denjiro is right in doing so, but you understand like why they would do this a little bit more, especially if those funds are being given to the poor in Wano. Actually, if you think about it, Kyoshiro's kind of a combination between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. He's like Sanders because he wants to redistribute wealth, but then he's also like Biden because he just randomly doses off in the middle of a sentence.
We actually find out why it is that Kyoshiro kind of dozes off. It's because he's up all night being the witching hour boy.
And there were actually a lot of clues in the story that pointed to Denjiro turning out to be both Kyoshiro and the witching hour boy. Like I said, he was the money changer for the Kurozumi clan. And when we were first introduced to him, he actually calls Orochi a coward, which I thought was kind of suspicious. And then, like, when he's talking about what happened the night that Oden died, he gets very angry and tries to pass it off as, like, him yearning for revenge against the samurai to serve Orochi. And then finally, if you look at his hair, if you flip it back, you can definitely fit Denjiro's ponytail in his hairdo. Now, I think it's very important to remember that the last we heard of Kyoshiro was when Orochi was about to set sail to go to Onigashima Island, and Fukurokuju, the leader of the Oniwabanchu, said that Kyoshiro was going to be looking after the flower capital and that he wouldn't be able to make it to the fire festival. And so because of that, I think it's pretty obvious now that Kyoshiro is a key component or a key player in the plan to hide away the Straw Hats so that they can surprise Orochi and Kaido at Onigashima, right? So Kyoshiro must have helped them. Another very important point here is that before preparations for the invasion begin, Hiyori is with Kawamatsu and she kind of separates herself from him. And then later we see Kawamatsu talking to the scabbards and revealing to them that Hiyori is alive, that she's fine, she's an adult now, all that stuff. And Inuarashi actually asks Kawamatsu, wait, like, where is she now? Where is Hiyori? And Kawamatsu says, don't worry, she's safe. So that kind of gets me to think that Kawamatsu at least knows now that Denjiro is Kyoshiro and that he left Hiyori under his care. Otherwise, I don't think he would have left Hiyori just go away like that.
And so all those points that I just mentioned let us know a couple of things. Number one, they let us know that Kawamatsu is in on the plan. He knows where the Straw Hats are, and I think he's just playing along. Another thing that this whole thing lets us know is that the plan of showing up at that port and not finding anyone was to throw off the traitor. They fed the traitor the plan that was wrong so that Orochi could try and take advantage of it and to have Orochi convinced that he has now the upper hand and that he has nothing to worry about. And then another thing that this lets us know is that Kyoshiro knows who the traitor is because he must have told Kawamatsu or somebody in the alliance, hey, like this person, this traitor is actually feeding information to Orochi. I work under Orochi, so, Kyoshiro would know who the traitor is. So they ended up feeding the spy the wrong information so that he would pass it to Orochi, right? So in other words, the Straw Hats already know who the traitor is. That's going to do it for me. Overall, I thought the chapter did a really great job at tying up some loose ends. And the good thing about that is that way, because these loose ends have already been tied up, they won't interfere with the pacing of the fights during the Fire Festival. So thought it was a great chapter of One Piece. Let me know your thoughts down below. You know what to do if you like the video. Subscribe if you haven't. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe. Have a great week. Catch you later. Bye.